Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adapted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
Lord Tywin was dead. The Raven had come to Winterfell late at night, 6 nights ago, and Ned had read it, written in Lady Joanna's flowing script. It detailed how Lord Tywin had been found and the likely cause for his death. Poison. The work of a coward or a very smart man or woman. Ned had not known how to feel. His foster father was dead, murdered, and now Jaime, his brother in all but name, was Lord of the Westerlands. Ned had written letters to both Lady Joanna and Jaime offering his condolences and asking if there was anything that he could do to help. He knew what he wanted to do, he wanted to get revenge, but he knew not who had done the deed, and therefore could do nothing more than simply accept that this had happened. He had of course sent word to his little helps across King's Landing, and asked them to keep an eye on anything unusual, and even the usual, for one could not be too careful. Grief had been buried when the Danes had arrived. Lord Reimagined, Lord of Starfall and Guardian of the Torrentine, had arrived at Winterfell early in the morning 3 days ago to discuss trade and other things with father, and he had brought his sister Ashur with him. Ned had been pleasantly surprised seeing Ashara. He had not thought she'd be with her brother, but he was happy all the same. He knew, of course, that there were many things that they needed to say to one another, and they hadn't spent much time in one another's presence since she'd been here. That was to change today, now that he'd been given permission by Ep9 for what he wanted to do. He felt a flutter of nervousness then, but quickly pushed it down. Brandon was not here. Indeed. The heir to Winterfell was touring the north, getting to know his future bannermen, and no doubt preparing for the war that was inevitably coming. That was good. Ned did not think he wanted Brandon to meet Ashara, more for what his brother would do than anything else. Their reunion had been strained, but at least they were talking to one another. The clearing of a throat brought him back to the present. He looked at his father and bowed his head, fighting to keep a blush from appearing on his cheeks. "My apologies, father." He raised his head and found Lord Rickard smiling. "It is perfectly fine, Eddard. I know you must be nervous with what you have planned for yourself and Lady Ashar, but there are things that we must discuss before I can allow you to go. You understand, do you not?" Ned nodded. He understood. Even if he did not want to really be here, he fought to keep the image of Ashara's hair out of his mind. "I understand, father." Lord Rickard took a deep breath, then spoke. "Good. There is much we must discuss. First and foremost, Lord Tywin is dead, as you know. How are you coping?" Ned was not sure what to say. He had not thought that this would be the first thing his father asked him. Lord Rickard was not exactly known for being the most open about his emotions, though as Ned thought about it, his father had always asked him how he was feeling after Duskendale, so he supposed his initial judgment was harsher than it needed to be. He took a breath and then replied honestly, "I am angry, father, and I am confused. I am angry because Lord Tywin is dead and that he was murdered and that Jaime and Cersei are without a father. I am confused because I am not sure who could have done this deed, especially as the enemies of the crown have all been broken." Lord Tywin was a powerful man, Eddard. Powerful men always have enemies. Regardless of whether they themselves are powerful or not, the enemies will find ways to creep into the system and to take advantage of it. For their own nefarious means, Lord Tywin was poisoned. That suggests that someone within his household was either bought for or changed sides and slipped something into his drink. Lord Rickard replied, calm as always. Ned nodded. That made sense. He did not know Lord Tywin's household as well as he used to, having not been a member of it for some time. However, he did still have friends there. I've sent word to some of the old guard there and have asked them to keep an eye out for anything suspicious within the household before things get out of hand. That is good, Lord Rickard replied. There was a brief pause, then father spoke once more. With Tywin dead, there will be those who will come to the forefront to try and pressure the king into repealing or stopping his reforms. I know the king, though, and I know that the death of his oldest friend will only convince him to continue pursuing these reforms with added rigorousness. That will make him a prime target for rebellion. Is that why Brandon has begun touring the north? Ned asked. To prepare the lords for an upcoming war? Yes, Lord Rickard replied simply. I do not know when the war will happen, but it will happen, and it is best that we ensure that the lands of the North are prepared for it. If one considers the views of some of the lords within the North, we must take these steps. You think they will oppose the cause of supporting the king? Ned asked. He knew that some of the lords did not fully support the crown gaining more power, but actively disrupting things because of this that did not make sense to him. I think that many of the lords are petty. They squabble like children and need a firm hand to rein them in most of the time. I think that with Tywin dead, the northern lords are going to push for things that we cannot give them, that we shall not give them, and I need Brandon to realize that, father stated. Ned was about to ask his father what he meant when it hit him. Shocked, he exclaimed, "Surely they still do not think that independence is a possible likelihood." His father sighed. You would think they would have learned by now, but no, there are those who dream of independence. It is particularly true of those in the far reaches of the North. They dream of days when they could do whatever they wanted, and it would take days for Winterfell to respond. They fear the growing communication links, and they fear the fact that the crown would take power away from them and their right to do as they please. Ned could see the Umbers and the Karstarks particularly chafing at that, but he had always wondered why his father had never seemed to chafe. And that does not bother you, that the crown would try to take your power from you? Lord Rickard shook his head. I have been Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North since I was but 14 name days old. Ned, I have seen a great many things, and I have experienced a lot. The one thing I know for certain is that the Seven Kingdoms cannot continue as they currently are. This division by kingdom and by region and by faith is nonsense. It does more harm than good, and the fact that none of our enemies have used it to destroy us yet is a sign that they are foolish, but we cannot count on them being foolish forever. We must ensure that we are united. The king is doing what must be done to prevent regional or religious or cultural differences from tearing us apart. And I, for one, agree with him. He thought over what his father said. He also thought over what he knew of Brandon, and then it came to him. You want to play on the fact that Brandon does not like people making demands of him to drive him away from the independence group and toward the more rational side. Yes, Brandon has spent a long time listening to Dustin and Risewell flatter him with empty platitudes. They are snakes waiting in the grass. They will flatter him, convince him to crown himself if they can, and then when the time is right, they will demand an arm and a leg from him, so that they do not reveal everything about him. Brandon has been too open with his weaknesses and his strengths. He has not shown enough restraint. This tour of the North will allow him to see that, and allow him to formulate what he wishes to do next, Lord Rickard stated. Ned could see the sense in what his father was saying, but at the same time, there was a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. This was Brandon they were talking about. Hot-headed, impulsive Brandon, who had once cut a boy and nearly killed him because of a challenge. Ned took a breath, considered his next words carefully, then finally spoke. What will you do if he comes back and is even more convinced of the point of view he held before he departed? As so often happened when it came to discussions of Brandon, Ned expected his father to say that Brandon would see sense and not remain stuck in some bygone era. Instead, Ned was surprised when his father said, "Then I will teach him myself." Ned did not want to ask what that would mean, and so instead he asked, "With the Danes here, what do you want to gain? What do you think they want?" He paused, and then added, apart from the obvious. He blushed slightly. His father smiled. Lord Aen's a smart man. He knows that Starfall's minerals and the lumber and timber from the north are a good combination. He also knows that the king wishes to bring the two furthest kingdoms closer together, and so he is making the effort that Prince Doran is not. I believe he wants to ensure we remember who it was who came to the north first, before the chaos began. So, he wants a seat at the table then? Ned inquired. The minerals and natural resources that had been found in the north and were being extracted were worth far more than anything that Starfall could provide, but Ned suspected his father did not want to crowd out the market with their produce just yet. He thought of what Ashara had told him about her brother, and he knew then that Alam Dane was also angling for something else. He also wants to know where we stand on the legal codes being changed. That was a big thing for Lord Alam. The man was, according to his sister, a big person for legal codes and their wording, and with the king planning an overhaul of many of the legal codes that had stood since the time of Jaehaerys the Wise, Ned could see why. Lord Rickard nodded. Indeed. He wants to see what my view is. Given that the last time such a vast overhauling of the legal codes was planned, Lord Bernard Stark vigorously objected and had to be reminded by dragons that it was the Targaryens who made the decisions. Now, not him. I can see why Lord Ellen would be most curious as to what my view on this is. And what is your view? Ned asked. Though he thought he already knew that answer. I believe it necessary. The kingdoms are decaying, and only a legal change the likes of which the king is planning can save it. Father responded. Ned remained silent, contemplating his father's answer and wondering whether Brandon had ever even spared this so much as a thought. His thoughts were interrupted when his father spoke once more. But that is enough for now. Go, be with Lady Ashara, Eddard, and do what you must. Ned got up, bowed before his father, and then turned and walked out of the solar, his heart beginning to quicken. Ned walked through the hallway, trying desperately not to break and run. He knew what he needed to do. He knew where Ashara was going to be. He just needed to take a deep breath and make sure that this was all going to go okay. It wouldn't go okay if he couldn't speak properly. He continued walking, taking deep breaths as he did so. He walked down a flight of stairs, turned right, then left, then right again, before stopping at Ashara's room. He took another breath, then knocked. "Come in," came the response. He opened the door, and before he could speak, he felt his breath get knocked out of him by the force of the hug he was given. He looked down and smiled. Ashara looked up at him. "I was wondering when you were going to come and visit me." "I'm sorry it has taken so long," Ned said formally. Gods, she was beautiful. How was he ever going to get the words out? What if she said no? He pushed those thoughts down and then asked, "Would you like to go for a walk with me?" Ashara smiled, and he felt as if his heart might jump out of his throat. "I would love nothing more." Ned pulled back, and though he desperately missed the feeling of Ashara pressed against him, he comforted himself by taking her arm and linking it with his. They turned and walked out of the room. Ned found himself content to revel in the comfortable silence that fell between them. The hallways were warm, the springs the reason for that, and he wondered how Ashara found her room. He wanted to ask, but wasn't sure whether or not the words would come out right. He looked at her briefly. Her hair was flowing down her back, and her dress was golden. Ned felt his heart quicken again. Before he knew what he was saying, the words were out of his mouth. "You look very beautiful." Ashara smiled. "Thank you. And you look very handsome." Ned shrugged. He didn't think he did. Not compared to Brandon, or to anyone else in Winterfell. He was too plain. What if she said no? They kept walking, and as they came to the outer yard, Ara spoke, her voice questioning. "My room is quite warm at night, even though there was quite the chill on the air. Why is that?" "There are hot springs located deep underground that provide a lot of warmth to the castle, ensuring that it is never too warm or too cold," Ned replied. "Really?" Ashara exclaimed. "Really?" Ned replied, grinning. How is that possible?" the Ashara asked. They kept walking. Ned could feel the crunch of snow underfoot and felt his grin widening. It was a special design that Brandon the Builder supposedly came up with. That is the legend, at least. Ashara snorted. Ned looked at her and saw her raise an eyebrow. "And what does the Master Historian think?" Ned blushed. "I think that Brandon Stark, or whoever it was that decided to build the man castle here, did so because the hot springs were already present, and they thought it would make a good place for a resting way between the moat and the far north." Ashara looked at him and he elaborated. "Originally, from what I've been able to find out, Moat Cailin was the seat of power for the kings of winter. They held it and used it to direct affairs, but as their land grew and they took in more kingdoms, they needed a place where they could go to better manage things, and so Winterfell was built. The hot springs made it a more alluring prospect. They walked through the gates and out into the Godswood. Ned knew the moment was approaching. If only he could figure out how to get the words out. Before he could say anything, though, Ashara spoke. "I'd love to help you find out more about this. It sounds like it could be fascinating." Ned's heart stuttered. Could she mean that? Could this beautiful and smart woman really want to spend time with him perusing through dusty tomes and library shelves? It seemed too good to be true. I would love that as well," he found himself saying. He had never meant anything more in his life. They were before the heart tree, its blood-red eyes staring out at them. Ned felt Ashara shiver, and he pulled her closer to him. She leaned into his side, and he heard her whisper, "What made you so interested in history, Ned?" Ned thought about the question, and then answered, "When I was a child, my mother used to read to me. She used to read stories about the Long Night, about the children, and about the kingdoms before and after the conquest. She always used to tell me that I should question everything and find out everything I wanted to know. and I always wanted to know more, so I used to spend hours in the library here, and at the Rock and at King's Landing. I spent hours reading through all the books I could. He looked down, and Ashura was gazing fondly at him. His heart felt as though it might burst. I can see that. I would love to help you find out more, she said again. Before he knew what he was doing, he spoke, and I would love for you to help me. Ashara, I've never met anyone like you. You've accepted me for who I am. You've never compared me to my brother, nor to anyone else. You've put up with my ramblings about everything, and I love listening to you and talking with you. I miss you when we're not together, and I want to spend every waking moment with you. He was on one knee, a ring in his hand. I guess what I'm trying to say is Ashara Dane. Will you marry me? There was a moment of silence. Ashara's eyes were wide, his breathing sounded shallow to his own ears. But then she gasped and said, Of course. Yes. Of course I will. I love you. Ned smiled. I love you too. He put the ring on her finger and stood up and swept her into his arms and kissed her. His second-born son was married. There had been a small wedding at Winterfell a few moons ago. The families of both bride and groom had been there, and no one else. Rickard had not completely approved of that. He had thought that perhaps they should have a proper wedding, so as not to cast any doubt over it. But Eddard had insisted that it just be them and their families. And truly, his son had never looked so happy as he had done then, that Rickard had acquiesced. His son was a married man, and he looked happy, happier than Rickard had ever seen him before. That in itself was worth the inevitable grief that some of the lords might give him when they realized that they hadn't been invited to the wedding, and that there was on less Stark on offer now. That Eddard had married a Southerner was something Rickard was happy about. They needed to further their trade links with the South, and they also needed some fresh blood in the family tree. The Northern lords could complain all they wanted. They weren't going to change this. And with what Rickard knew what needed to be done, there would be a few heiresses free in the north for Bingen to have his pick of soon enough. Now there was the matter of his firstborn's marriage. Rickard, Brandon, and Lyanna, and some 60 of their retainers had come south to River Run for the marriage that was to be held in the Sept of River Run. The king had ordered that there be both a marriage in the style of the faith and a marriage in the style of the old gods, to satisfy both denominations. Rickard was more than happy to allow this, and so here they were. Brandon had returned from his journey around the north, not completely changed, but not completely the same as he had been before. There seemed to be a much greater understanding about the way things worked. There was less anger in his firstborn and more contemplative thinking. That could only bode well for what was to come. Rickard had spent some time looking at his future good daughter, and he did not think Catelyn Tully would be anything like Barbary Reswell. Where Reswell was a woman with vapid sensibilities, who could say the odd smart thing, Catelyn Tully appeared to know more than she let on. That was all for the good, as far as Rickard was concerned. Rickard looked at his firstborn son, then. Brandon was tall, taller than him by some way. He had the traditional brown hair and gray eyes of the Starks, but his eyes were filled with expression, like Liara's had been. Brandon was far easier to smile than Rickard was. Much like Liara, he was impulsive and hot-headed. A trait no doubt inherited from the wandering wolf. But he had a good heart, and he could be very understanding when he wanted to be. Rickard took a breath, then spoke. You know what comes next. You know that this marriage will bring benefits beyond count to our family and to the north. I know, father, Brandon replied. But more importantly, I want to know if you know what this will bring you, Rickard asked. For a moment, his son looked somewhat confused, and then he nodded. I know that Catelyn is a smart girl. She knows more about the world than anyone else I've ever met beside Ned. I know that she knows how to manage the accounts and keep on top of things. That last bit was said with some relish that Rickard did not want to think about. And I know that she is good of heart and kind. And I know she knows more about Winterfell than perhaps Barbary ever could. Rickard nodded. At least his son was not completely empty of sense then. He knew that the boy had long harbored some desire to marry the Ravesero girl, but that would have allowed a snake into Winterfell, and Rickard was determined to prevent that. Very well. You know what must happen after the ceremony? Yes, and I know that we shall be having a ceremony in Winterfell once we are done here, Brandon replied. Rickard inclined his head and then asked, You've managed to look around the place since being here, and you've met the various men who have come to court, Lyanna. What do you make of them? At this Brandon pulled a face. Most of them are foolish sops who do not know the difference between steel and real steel. They are the type of people who would boast about taming a wolf and failing to realize that Lyanna is actually rebelling against their control completely. I think out of all the men who have come here today, the only two I like are Brynden Blackwood and Elbert Arryn. Blackwood is a worshipper of the old gods, and he has no trouble accepting the fact that Lyax likes riding horses and doing things that are not traditionally womanly. Elbert seems as if he would be a good marriage because he is heir to the Vale and because he has sense. Rickard smiled. Very well, I shall consider what you have had to say on this. For now, though, I shall let you finish getting ready. He made to turn away, but before he could leave, his firstborn spoke. When this is done, what will happen to the rest of them? He did not need to ask to know who Brandon was on about. They will be dealt with accordingly. They have broken the king's peace and must be punished for it. He saw his son's shoulders slump, but then they straightened. Very well, came the response. Rickard nodded and walked out of the room. He made his way to the Septon Martin Castle, walking behind him. As they walked, Rickard spoke. What news has there been of our guests? They are not talking, or at least the main leaders are not talking. There is one who insists that the information he gave is completely true, Castle replied. Rickard nodded. Without the others talking, we have no way of knowing, for sure. They continued walking, and then arrived at the Sept. He nodded to those of his retainers who were present. Manderly, Mormont, Umber, and Flint, they had all come. Manderly looked as though he might be falling to his death under his own weight. Rissel had not come, though the little messengers he had sent in rider colors had made his point for him. He stood where he was on the left side of the altar, waiting. Eventually Brandon appeared, wearing a cloak of stark gray, the dire wolf proud on his back. Rickard nodded at his son and then turned to look around the Sept. It was an old building, the signs of history written all across its walls. From the way the carvings of the Seven coming to life in the form of Hugger Hill were drawn, to the way the images of great scenes were done, there was history here, but there was something else. A definite sign that things were changing. The idols themselves were made from silver and gold and black gems, the kind one might find on Dragonstone or Volantis. He found himself wondering how the Tullys had found such a thing. Then the doors opened once more and he pushed the thoughts away. Brandon gasped when his bride entered, and as he looked at her in her red and blue dress, her hair done up in an elaborate braid, Rickard could admit that she did look beautiful. Brandon was a very lucky man. He just hoped his firstborn son knew that. She came to stand on the right side of the altar, and his son smiled at her. Rickard nodded to Hoster and listened as the vows began. We are gathered here today to witness this most holy and sacred of unions. Today, two people will join themselves in body and spirit, and their union shall last for the rest of time. Who comes? Lady Catelyn of House Tully. Who claims her? Lord Hoster said. Brandon of House Stark, Brandon said, clearly and confidently. Take hands. The Septon commanded, and Rickard watched as his son and Catelyn Tully did so. By the power of the Seven, I do declare that this union is recognized by the gods, and by His Majesty the King. I do declare that this union has the approval of the heads of the houses, and that they have granted permission for all to be here. If there is anyone who believes that these two should not marry, please speak now. There was a moment's silence. Nobody said anything. Rickard had made sure the riders could not interfere. Then let us continue. Brandon spoke first. I, Brandon of House Stark, do solemnly swear to protect you, to love you, to confide in you, and to trust you from this day to my last. I shall always be here for you, in both mind and spirit. I do swear this before the gods. Lady Catelyn spoke then. I, Catelyn of House Tully, do solemnly swear to love you, to confide in you, to protect you, and to trust you from this day to my last. I shall always be here for you, in both mind and spirit. I do swear this before the gods. There was a brief pause, and then the Septon spoke. Now that the vows have been exchanged, let us exchange the rings. Rickard watched as Brandon took the ring from John Umber and placed it on his betrothed's finger, and she did the same. The Septon smiled. All is said and done. You may now kiss as husband and wife. Rickard cheered with the others as his son and his good daughter kissed. He watched as the newlyweds walked out of the Septon and made their way over to the great hall for the feast. Once they were out of the hall, he began to walk as well, and soon found Hoster Tully walking alongside him. I trust those little messengers have been dealt with, the Lord of Riverrun asked. They have indeed, Rickard said simply. They might be family now, but that did not mean he would give Tully everything. Good, good, Tully said. They continued in silence for a while before coming to the hall. As the doors opened and the bride and groom entered, he spoke again. They've captured 3 men who claim to have information about what happened to Lord Tywin. And who might these men be? Rickard asked. He was already aware of this. Ned's men had told him about it some time ago. Men from the border regions, bearing masks of that most deadly of trios. It seems they were under orders to spread news of Tywin Lannister's tyranny, and ensure that there was a bounty placed on his head. Hoster murmured as they made their way over to the main table. Rickard said nothing, neither did Hoster. The man got up and made a toast. They cheered, as was appropriate, then the food was served. Rickard tucked into the starter of duck rolls, savoring the taste, and making a note to ask the cook at Winterfell to make these dishes more often. He had some wine, and kept an eye on Brandon. His son seemed engaged in a conversation with his bride, so that was a relief. He turned back to his food and then spoke to Hoster. I think we shall be seeing more movement sooner rather than later. Indeed, I agree. Albert Arryn's presence here is a clear sign that Jon Arryn has finally decided to partake in the affairs of the realm again, and that he has finally recognized that he will never have an heir of his own body. Hoster stated simply, "Have you considered offering Lysha for the boy?" Rickard asked. Tully did not flush, but there was a movement in his person that suggested embarrassment. Rickard knew why that was, but said nothing, waiting for the man to speak. "I have considered it, yes." Silence fell between them again. Rickard decided that pushing this matter would not bring any noticeable benefit to him, and therefore he was content to eat and drink. The duck was replaced by pork spiced with herbs and garlic brought from the east, served with potatoes and salad. It was a delightful meal, added to with cheese and ham and bread. Rickard felt as though he'd never eaten so well in his life, and as he looked around the hall, he noticed that everyone seemed to be sharing in this thought process. More people were eating than were talking, always a sure sign that things were going well. As the second course was taken away, he found himself talking, not to Hoster, but to the man's brother, Ser Brynden, a man he had come to know quite well during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. "Tell me, Ser, has Hoster not tried to marry you off again?" The man chuckled. "He has tried. After Bethany, there were numerous people he considered, but eventually he gave up. I think he has realized I am a better command than a political tool." Rickard remembered the arguments he had had with his cousins Brandon and Benjen over this exact thing, and so found himself asking, "And that suits you, remaining unwed?" A strange look came over Sarkvan Brynden. "It does. I prefer being an uncle to a father. I know how to command and how to fight, and I know how to be what my nieces and nephew need me to be, but I could not be a father. I do not have that temperament." Rickard nodded. That was a fair comment. He knew that was one his cousin Brandon had shared, despite being heir to the vast fortune that Ortos Stark had left behind. They did not talk after that for the next tier was served. This time it was roasted beef with servings of dumplings, a mouth-watering dish that duly got Rickard's full attention. He ate with gusto, and as he glanced over at his son, he was pleased to see the boy full enraptured with what Lady Catelyn was saying. Rickard turned his eyes back to his own plate and continued eating, savoring the flavor and the taste. When he was done, he put his cutlery back onto the plate and took a sip of wine. As the plates were cleared, Hoster spoke to him once more. "You know, I think there might be some sort of issue within the Vale." "What sort of issue?" Rickard asked. "I think that Jon Arryn and his ward have been at loggerheads. From what I have heard, Baratheon wants to remain in the Vale indefinitely. But Arryn has been pushing him to return to Storm's End and actually start ruling, and with the king instituting these reforms, there is much impetus for him to do so." Hoster replied, "Indeed," Rickard stated. "I have often found it odd how the boy never made a venture to Storm's End, even after his father and mother died. He made one journey to King's Landing to swear fealty to the king, and then returned to the Vale. I know he has done trips around the Stormlands, and nothing more. No true administrative rule or anything of the sort. I think we might have a problem when he does finally return southwards. Too many odd things are mentioned about what happens in the Vale for the king to ever be comfortable about it," Hoster stated. Rickard nodded, and then, as dessert was served, lost himself in the eating of that. Once that was done, the plate was taken away, and as the other dishes were taken away and the guests began to settle down, Hoster spoke up. "My lords and ladies, the vows have been said, the food has been had, the drink has been consumed. I think it is time for our two newlyweds to proceed with the bedding. What do you say?" A roar went up, and as lords and ladies began moving off their seats to help, There was more movement. He did not see it at first, for he saw only his son and good daughter being carried away. But as he made his way to retire, he found the doors barred. He heard a scream. He turned, and he saw Lady Blackwood fall to the ground with a dagger through her throat. He heard another scream, and saw another lady fall. He made to move for the door, but a guard pushed him back. "What the devil are you doing?" he yelled. "I'm sorry, my lord, but traitors are not allowed to leave here," the guard replied. "Traitors? What are you on about?" Rickard snarled, wishing he'd brought his sword with him. "You betrayed the rightful king and the rightful way of life when you sided with your ex and Aegon. You must suffer for that." The guard replied, shoving Rickard back into the hall. "Hoster, what is the meaning of this?" Rickard yelled over the cacophony. Hoster did not respond, for as Rickard turned, he saw his friend staggering to the ground, knives beyond count buried into him. He heard a scream and a yell, and turned around again. He saw his son and his good daughter pushing back against the guards and the men who wore Tully sigils, but were really from another time. Rickard grabbed a knife from the table and advanced forward. A man came, and he ducked and weaved before burying the knife in the man's throat. As the man fell, Rickard quickly snatched his sword. He advanced forward and cut down 3 men who came at him. Another man came, and he cut him down as well. His heart hammered. His blood was pooling. Brandon fell, but got up again. Umber was cut down. Mormont was cut down. Manderley was cut down, his chins bleeding. He got to his son. "Who are these people?" Brandon yelled, pulling Catelyn to him. "Traitors," Rickard replied. He gestured at a fallen soldier. "Grab his sword and defend yourself." His son did as he was told, and they advanced forward. Men came and men fell. Their swords became slick with blood. But there were more. How had they not seen this? How had they not realized something like this could happen? After Stefan, after Tywin, they should have been smarter, more prepared. He cut down another man, but took a deep blow to the chest. He fell to his knees, just in time to see Catelyn Tully get a sword through her stomach. He heard Brandon shout. He saw Brandon move. He saw 5 men approach his son, and he knew what would happen before it did. Brandon cut down one of the men. He killed another, and then the other 3 killed him. They buried their weapons in him and pushed him down until the sword in his hand dropped, and he fell face down. Around him the world broke. The ground swallowed him, and there suddenly was a man he recognized. "You!" he exclaimed. The man laughed. "It was always me." The man pressed something cold against him, and in one smooth motion, a river opened. Rickard closed his eyes and fell into Lyra's open embrace. The council room was filled with the members of the council, and the Kingsguard, since word had come of events at River Run and Lord Tywin's murder. The king had decided that he would not be alone without the Kingsguard present. Currently 4 were in the room. 1 was protecting Mother, and 2 were protecting Shayna and the children. Rosier looked around the room and noticed the way Merryweather, the new hand of the king, shifted and shook occasionally. He was not comfortable within this room. He had always been a bootlicker. Father had appointed him hand to keep a family who had once been traitors, very close to the throne. Lord Staunen spoke. "Both Donnerering and Swan have confessed to planning and executing Lord Stefan and Lady Cassana and their sons' murders. They state that they felt Lord Stefan was standing in the way of them being able to achieve a fair and reasonable settlement. They feel Lord Stefan failed in his duty as Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, and that he was merely a Targaryen puppet. They felt removing him would do the region a world of good." Hrothgar felt a ripple of anger course through him. Then, cousin Stefan had been a smart and caring man. He had brought peace to an often turbulent region, and he had ruled fairly. He had not deserved to be murdered, nor had his wife. Lady Cassana was a sweet lady who provided fair judgment and wisdom, and cousin Stannis had been but a child. Father was silent. The grief that had haunted him since they had learned of cousin Stefan's death was like a shroud around him now. Hrothgar spoke. "How long did it take for them to make this confession?" "A week of intense questioning, my prince. Originally, they did not seem as if they were going to break their silence, but then they did. Both confessed at the same time and admitted the other's role in helping bring them into this state of affairs." Staunton replied. "You say they confessed at once on the same time?" Rosier asked. "Yes, your royal highness," Staunton said. Rhaegar thought about this and then said, "When they were kept in their cells, what was their treatment like? Were they kept in good conditions and only questioned with force, or were the conditions within the cells similar to how they were treated once they were questioned? That was important, depending on how Staunton answered. The information Dondarrion and Swan gave could either be completely useful or made redundant and they would walk free. Father looked at Staunton, his violet eyes piercing. Staunton took a breath, then spoke. They were kept in fair conditions as befits their status as lords of His Majesty's realm. They were only treated roughly during questioning. Rosier nodded, and what else did they have to say about why they decided to commit treason? Lord Staunton was silent a moment. His eyes scanned through his notes. They believed that the king's reforms were harmful to the kingdoms. They believed that the king was focused purely on achieving something that nobody else wanted. Lord Staunton was his lord paramount and the king's cousin, supposed to exercise his influence to reduce the king's plans. And in their minds, as he was a devoted supporter of the crown's, he had failed to fulfill his duty. They believed that there was a need to use bandits to take him out. They felt it would be fitting, considering how Lord Lyale had died. Father exhaled, and Rhaegar closed his eyes momentarily. Lord Lyale had been attacked by bandits on the orders of the Blackfyres and murdered, simply because the Blackfyres had believed his death would better serve to drive a wedge between the Stormlands and the Crown, between Baratheon and Targaryen. It had not worked, though. There had been countless deaths because of it. Rhaegar exhaled. They are fools. The reforms that the king is implementing are the reforms this kingdom is long overdue. They cannot be allowed to hold back progress for the sake of outdated ideals that have been shown to do more harm than good. Lord Staunton nodded, and Lord Chalstead, the Master of Coin, spoke. Your Royal Highness, Dondarrion and Swan are two of the most powerful lords within the Stormlands, and they are marcher lords with old and proud traditions. They have been condemned through their own words. But what of their families? Will they be forced to suffer the same fates as well? Before Rogier could respond, Father spoke. His voice shook with anger. The lords will be executed. Their wives also. The wives are always told what their husbands are going to do. The children will be sent to the Faith and the Wall, or they will be brought to foster here. They will never again see their homes. Crown-appointed regents shall rule in Blackhaven and Stonehelm. Chalstead nodded. Very well, Your Majesty. Varys spoke then. Stonehelm and Blackhaven will be brought directly under the Crown's control. My little birds tell me that the people and the bannermen of Dondarrion and Swan did not approve of their lord's actions. They did not approve of their stances and therefore are taking news of their imprisonment with great relief. Good, the people should not suffer for the faults of their betters, Rosier said, knowing how close that came to censure. I want Dondarrion and Swan executed today. Before the people of King's Landing, send out the heralds to alert the people. I want them all to see this. The king said, his voice shaking with anger and the desire for revenge. Of course, Your Majesty, Varys and Lord Staunton said. The king nodded, and Rhaegar knew his father would take great pleasure in getting his revenge on those who had harmed and hurt his family. Varys spoke then, Your Majesty, the man responsible for Lord Tywin's death has also spoken up about why he did what he did. Rhaegar leaned forward. After a month of searching, the eunuch's little birds had finally found the man. He had brown hair and green eyes. He spoke with arrogance and a certainty that came from knowing his place in the world. Rhaegar was not sure whether to believe the eunuch, but they had a culprit. And what did he say? He stated that he did the deed through the use of viper's venom, and that he did it as revenge for all the wrong that Lord Tywin had inflicted on the realm. The eunuch replied. Rotier snorted. What wrong had Lord Tywin inflicted on the realm? He helped His Majesty, the king, bring peace to the realm for nearly 20 years. He ensured that the accounts were sorted, and he helped bring Braavos down to its knees. He did nothing wrong, the eunuch nodded. According to this man, Lord Tywin was helping break the natural order of things, and that he needed to be removed to show the king the error of his ways. He was doing this for the king, or so he claims. A man bent on changing something that does not need changing. A man who committed the gravest of treasons for nothing more than the paranoia in his head. Rosier ate immediately, knowing that this man was full of shit and that there was something else to it than the eunuch was letting on to. The man also claimed that there were those within the Westerlands who had been waiting for Lord Tywin to fall to take their revenge on his family. He cited the Farmans and other minor houses who Lord Tywin had brought into the fold following his father's death with force or by means of persuasion. He stated that these lords and families were now going to pounce of Lord Jaime. The eunuch stated. Raxley inhaled sharply. Jaime was a smart lad. He was also a good fighter, but whether he could handle the combined might of the Farmans and whatever lackeys they managed to rally to their banner, Rhaegar did not know. How true is this man's claim? It is based on a false premise, Your Royal Highness. The eunuch replied. Explain, Rhaegar demanded. When Lord Tywin became Lord of the West, there were those who outright despised the Lannisters and wished for nothing more than their downfall. They were terrified of what Lord Tywin would do. Over the years, he established peace, and the Westerlands prospered. The houses like the Farmans who might previously have wished harm on the Lannisters now wish nothing more than their continued success. The man who made these claims is nothing more than a madman who wishes for something he cannot have, the eunuch replied. The king said nothing, and so Rhaegar looked at Pycelle and asked, You have looked at this man, Pycelle. Does he display signs of madness? Pycelle was slow to respond, an act he seemed to have perfected over the years, designed to throw people off what he actually meant and what he actually felt. Rhaegar glared at the man to get him to hurry up. Now was not the time for his theatrics. Pycelle blushed and stated, Having looked at the man and looked through his records and the way he speaks, I can confirm that the man is indeed mad, and that he does not have the capabilities for rational thinking. Removing him from the world would be best for everyone. Then that is what shall happen, the king stated. I want him executed today as part of the same scene as that is to happen to Swan and Dondarrion. It shall happen as you command, your majesty. Lord Staunton stated, making a note of it on his paper. Varys spoke then. There has been another incident at Riverrun. At the wedding of Brandon Stark and Catelyn Tully, both the bride and groom were murdered alongside their fathers and several other guests, including prominent Northern and Riverlander lords. Rhaegar gasped, By the Seven, who would dare do such a thing? There was general chaos, but gradually order was restored as the men who killed Lord Hoster and Lord Rickard were cut down and their leaders were captured. Sir Brendan led the response to their efforts. From what reports I have received, it seems that the Brackens and the Freys were partially responsible for this. They placed their men in the livery of Riverrun and then acted. They sealed the doors of the Great Hall and killed anyone who became aware of their plan. They came under the banner of friendship and fooled all. Sir Brendan managed to protect his nephew and niece, whilst Lyanna Stark escaped harm due to not being in the Great Hall at the time of the event itself. She was helping one of her friends, the eunuch stated. Rhaegar closed his eyes. This was disastrous. 2 Lord Paramounts had been killed at a wedding by their own bannermen. The lords of the realm would be baying for blood, and rightly so. What else do you know? I have had my men question those who were party to the assault who escaped the resulting slaughter. They speak of being paid by a man wearing a mask of a hawk, and they also claim that Albert Arryn was seen riding away from a river run at great speed after the first course was served. The eunuch replied. Rhaegar looked at his father, whose eyes were wide, and he saw that his father's hands were beginning to shake a little. A man wearing a mask of a hawk and Albert Arryn, the heir to the Vale, riding away from the wedding. This cannot be a coincidence. There was a pause as the king's brows scrunched together. Send word to Riverrun and Winterfell, offer our condolences, and then send men out to the Twins and Stonehenge. Tell them they are to kill whoever gets in their way at these places. I also want more solid information. Yes, your majesty. Staunton and Pycelle and Varys said at the same time. The eunuch spoke again. There is also word that Lords Roxwell and Bolton are making moves to file formal complaints against Eddard Stark, stating he has not fulfilled his proper duty as caretaker in Winterfell. They wish to cite the old precedent of Corpus Ritualis for this. Eddard Stark is married and has brought good fortune to the north through the records of taxation. He has done his duty for the crown as well. I believe there is more to this than meets the eye. Rhaegar said immediately, Where were Bolton and Risewell when this wedding was happening? The king asked. Securely in the north, your majesty. Lord Rickard did not deign to invite them south for his son's wedding. The eunuch replied. Then tell them to come to King's Landing to formally launch a complaint, or they will not be taken seriously. The king responded. The king then looked at Chalstead. When was the last time the Vale and the Stormlands paid the interest on their taxes? Chalstead flicked through the books and sighed. 2 moons ago, I have sent repeated demands that they pay the interest, stating that all other kingdoms are doing so, yet they continue to refuse to do this. Letters have gone unanswered until this morning. Chalstead picked up a letter and read aloud. We shall not pay interest on taxes that have been raised without our consent. We shall not pay for a vanity project when it infringes on our natural rights as good and true people of the Seven Kingdoms. Until such time as the evil around the king is removed, we shall not pay." "Who wrote that letter?" the king asked, his voice dangerously low. "It came signed from the Vale, and contained the signatures of all the lords of the Vale and some of the Storm Lords as well. Robert Baratheon's signature is on it," Chalstead said quietly. The king took a deep breath. Rhaegar could imagine the rage that was boiling inside him, for it was the same rage that was simmering within him. How dare these fools try and go against their king? How dare they try and do anything that would harm the kingdom instead of protect it and improve it? When the king spoke, his voice was low. "Send another letter. Remind these lords that they hold their lands, because I permit it. Remind them that should they not pay the interest, their lands and titles and incomes are forfeit, and they will be left to beg on the road. Remind them what will happen, should they go against me. Should they refuse, they are traitors, and will be treated as such." Chalstead nodded and wrote that down. The king spoke once more. "This meeting is at an end." The king stood up and walked out of the room, accompanied by Ser Gerold and Ser Barristan. Rhaegar followed him shortly afterwards, accompanied by Ser Oswell and Ser Jonathor. He sent Jonathor off to protect the queen and walked in silence with Oswell. They arrived at his rooms, and he embraced Shaina and looked over at his children. "How are they?" he asked softly. "Rosieres is fine," his wife said, nodding to their little girl who was fast asleep in her crib. "But Axiolot's fever only gets worse," she said, nodding to their son, who slept with his brow scrunched up. "Master Colmore states that the fever is getting worse, that the fire is eating away at him. He is not sure what more can be done." There was fear in her voice, and Rosier felt his heart clench in pain. He did not know how to make it better. "How did the meeting go?" his wife asked. Rosier sighed. "We have got confessions from Dondarrion and Swan, and from the man who killed Lord Tywin. They cite their opposition to the reform's father, is planning as the reasons for why did what they did. They are to be executed today." There was also word from Riverrun. Lord Stark and Tully, and Brandon Stark and Catelyn Tully have been murdered at their wedding. Frey and Bracken seem behind it, though Albert Arryn was seen fleeing the scene before the murders happened. Furthermore, Arryn and Baratheon refused to pay the interest on their taxes. His heart clenched again. "What does this mean?" Shaina asked, her voice soft, though he could hear the fear. "Father has given Baratheon and Arryn one last chance to pay the interest. If they do not, then their lands and titles are forfeit, and they are traitors. I believe there will be war." Rosier responded. Shaina said nothing. They just stood there and held one another for a long time, until Sirthur came and informed them it was time to go to the executions. He left 30 men guarding his children and wife and walked out to Traitor's Gate, where the executions were to be held. He watched as 3 men were executed alongside their wives. He watched the crowd roar their approval at the blood that was shed. He watched it all, and he knew that what he had read was coming true, despite his best efforts to stop it. The days went by, and his son became more and more ill. Rosier knew what would happen, and he felt anger. Anger at the gods for taking his son away, for making his wife cry, and for making him feel so helpless. He toured the city, meeting with people and garnering their support. He had meetings with his father where they went over all possible situations and solutions. He watched more people be executed for what happened at Riverrun. He spent time with his wife and children, doing what he could to heal the wounds, forming as Yeagain became another figure on death's door. And then word came back from the Vale, a declaration of war and a reneging of fealty. He sighed and said his prayers. He was a married man. That thought continued to run through his mind now and then. He still had a hard time believing that Ashara was his wife, that she had said yes in the first place. He counted himself a very lucky man, and he hoped that his wife was enjoying herself. He knew that Winterfell was very different to Starfall or King's Landing. So far, it seemed that Ashara was enjoying herself, and it seemed that the people of Winterfell loved her. They seemed to be very accommodating, and Ashara was doing her best to understand northern culture and the ways of the north, as well as the larger culture that the king wanted. Nad was happy, and he felt guilty for that happiness, considering what had happened to Father and Brandon. When the Raven had come, he had not been able to believe it. Who would dare attack someone at their wedding? Who would dare kill someone at their own wedding? Brandon was gone, Father was gone, taken before their time. Lyanna had arrived back in Winterfell, and he had hugged her tightly, and then he had asked her what had happened. Her words had been frantic. The wedding had gone off without a hitch. But she had had to go outside, because Lady Sarah had taken ill, and Lyanna had not wanted to leave her alone, considering where they had been. And when she had tried to return, she had seen the doors barred and fighting happening. She had fled as soon as she could, learning on the way of Father and Brandon's deaths. Winterfell had been haunted by that. The bodies had been returned and buried. Zero Brandon had also sent him the heads of those who had done the deeds, their heads decorated spikes on the walls. He felt guilty for feeling happy and in love when his brother and father were dead. Ned stared at the heart tree and felt Ashara's hand on his shoulder. He did not turn around, but he did speak. "I do not know what I am doing." There was silence, and then he spoke again. Ashara had that way with him, of getting him to speak when normally he would remain completely silent. Father and Brandon are dead. Lyanna does not leave her room, and there are whisperings that there are those plotting things against Winterfell to prevent us from marching south to aid the king. The Raven had come 2 days ago, summoning them all to aid the king against the traitorous Arryns and Baratheons. Lyanna said that Elbert Arryn had attended the wedding on behalf of his uncle, but that he left before the first course was even removed. Ashara knew this as well as he did. She had been there when Lyanna had spoken, had comforted Lyanna when she had broken down and cried. Father thought there was something odd about Arryn. He always did think that the man had too much leeway. Father had always been right. It seemed this was one more thing he was right about. "I do not know what to do about the Ryswells." That was a lie. He knew what needed to be done. "Nedad," Ashara said softly, and he turned around. Her silvery hair was braided, and her cheeks were pink slightly. He moved slightly and opened his cloak to her. She sat down and moved in toward him. "I think that the Roswells need to die. They are responsible for the things that happened. The information is all there. They conspired with Brackens and Freys, and they plotted to send Brandon to his death. They gave him false information and made him think that they were okay with him leaving Barbary without the financial aid he'd promised her." When he had learned of that agreement, Ned had wanted to scream. Had Father known? Had Father even cared? "It has been left to me to clean up his mess, as always, just like when we were children. I cannot leave Lord Roswell alive, nor his heir or his second son. But the others, I do not know. Bethany Roswell is married to Roses Bolton, and Rose was the one who provided me with the information. Barbary is married to Willem Dustin, but Willem was the one who hit Brandon and got him to stay away from Barbary. Willem was a good man, firm and loyal, and Brandon had been terrified of him. I execute all of the Roswell men that splits the inheritance between Bolton and Dustin. I do not want to give them all the lands and riches. So, what do I do?" He wished the king had given firmer instructions, but the king had simply told him to address the matter and move forward. The war was coming, and the North's support would be needed. "You do what you think is right," Ashara said simply. "Do you want the Raidswalls to go extinct in the male line?" It seemed so cold and final when it was said like that, and Ned knew that normally he would be the first one to see that. The world was cold and final when it came to politics. He had known that for a long time. Yet suddenly, now he was Lord of Winterfell, and not simply the spare. It all seemed a bit much. He felt Ashara take his hand and link their fingers together. He sighed and replied, "I want to make them suffer, but I also know that they are important as a counterbalance to the Dustins and the Boltons. They bring an element of simplicity to things that would be lacking should I remove them. Furthermore, they balance one another out. Give Dustin and Bolton the inheritance, and they will squabble over it like children. I cannot have that, not with the war approaching. There is also the fact that Rosierswall and Benjen know one another, and that Rosiers was the one who told you of where his father had hidden the letters," Ashara pointed out. Ned nodded. Rosier was about 4 and 10 days old. He had come to Ned one day after the arrests, and told Ned what his father would not. Ned could not forget that, nor could he forget Benjen pleading for his friend's life. I suppose having Rose here in Winterfell and as Lord of the Rills would not hurt. He is a more amenable man and more compelling than his brothers. Roger and Rickard were foolish oafs, more suited to thuggery than lordship. Ashara nodded. She had told him herself that she had not found Roger or Rickard nice or even remotely pleasing in regards to their decorum. "I think you have your answer. And do not worry about the other lords, say. They will understand your decision." Ned sighed. He knew that Lord Wyman had died at the wedding, alongside Jorah Mormont and Lord Umber. John Umber, the new lord of Last Hearth, was a great swaggering giant who knew much and said little beyond how he was going to kill Freys. I think that you must make the decision quickly, my love. After all, there will be a great many who would wish for their own personal revenge on the Restwells, and then in that instance, Bolton might encourage them. Ned sighed once more. His wife was not wrong. Roose Bolton might have done his bit to ensure the Wriotsleys were under lock and key, but he was still a man, and he was still ambitious. If he could add to his house's revenues and prestige, he would. Ned would not grant him the full lands, even if his wife was the heir under the right of the firstborn. But getting half the lands would be something else. And then there was the fact that he might consider prodding Dustin into outright murder, considering the fact that William and Brandon had been as close as brothers. Ned sighed. He knew that if that happened, the lands would fall in their entirety to Roose under default law. He could not allow that to happen. He ran a hand through his hair, then stood, helping his wife up to her feet. He kissed and smiled. "What would I do without you?" he jested, but he meant it as well. His wife smiled in response, and they walked back to the castle, hand in hand. As they arrived back in the courtyard, Ned saw Vian Poole, his steward. "Vian, summon the lords. Tell them to make their way to the great hall. It is time." The man nodded and hurried off. Ned looked around for Martin before remembering with gut-wrenching clarity that Martin was dead. He had been murdered at River Run. Ned closed his eyes, felt Ashara squeeze his hand, and then he moved forward. Ashara and he took their seats. He on the winter throne and she next to him, where the queens of the north traditionally sat. The hall filled, and there was an expectant murmur around the hall. He saw Benjen and Lyanna sat on a table with Janelle Serwyn and Daisy Mormont. He nodded to them, then spoke. "My lords and ladies, it has been some time since we last met like this. A great tragedy occurred a few moons ago. My father and brother were murdered at my brother's wedding. They were taken and killed for no rhyme or reason. Their executioners rest within this very castle. Sir Roderick, bring in the prisoners." The doors clanged open, and the Raswells were dragged in, their chains clinking as they moved. The hall jeered as they were made to kneel before the throne. Ned felt his blood turn to ice as he stared at Lord Raswell. The man's head had been shaved, but his beard grew long. It was down to his stomach at this point. Ned thought. He cleared his throat, and the hall fell silent. "Lord Roderick, you and your sons are guilty of plotting against your liege, lord, and your king. Both are crimes of treason. You are guilty of plotting murder and execution. You and the Frez and Brackens had a hand in ensuring that the guests of Brandon Stark's wedding did not make it out alive. Tell me, why? Why would you do this?" Nothing was said for a time. Then Lord Roderick spoke, his voice husky. "Your family is turning its back on its roots, on its heritage. Your father was embracing a southern history and heritage that is not the way of the North. We are the last bastions of the old way. We had to protect that. The Starks have forgotten." "The Starks have forgotten nothing," John Umber bellowed. "It is you who have forgotten, Ratswell." There were murmurs of agreement. Roderick Ratswell remained impassive. "I did what I thought was right. These reforms that the king planned, they take away from who we are. They reduce us to nothingness. They make it so that we are merely another set of people who could be taxed and manipulated. I would not have it. So, instead of bringing this to the Lord of Winterfell's attention, you decided instead to plot his murder," Ned asked, his voice sounding cold, even to his own ears. "Your father did not listen. I brought it up. Many a time, we discussed the merits. He was blinded by his desire to bring the North, to bring the Starks closer to the crown. He wanted that above anything else. He had forgotten the way in which the crown had treated his ancestors previously. Your brother saw that?" Lord Roderick said. Angry murmurs spread through the crowd. Ned felt slightly uncomfortable. He knew that was what Roderick had wanted to achieve by mentioning Brandon, but Ned could not allow his own personal feelings to bleed through now. He had to be cold and unmoving. That does not excuse what you did. You decided to turn to violence when talking. Could have worked. You plotted and executed murder. That means you must suffer the punishment. Ned looked around the room and stated, "In the name of His Majesty, King Aerys of House Targaryen, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the Realm and King of the Andals and the First Men, I do hereby sentence you to death." He got up off the throne, grabbed his sword from Sepra Roderick, watched as Roderick Raswell was forced down so his neck was nearly touching the ground. He took a breath and then, in one swing, removed head from body. "Place it on the walls," he said. He turned to look at Rickard and Roger Raswell and said, As you both took part in your father's treason, you too shall die. Both men were forced down, and Ned took their heads. It took twice with Roger and thrice with Rickard. But eventually it was done. Their heads were also mounted on the walls. Ned gave the sword to Roderick Castle to clean, and sat back down on the winter throne. Now we are marching to war on the morrow. We must discuss our war plan. If the lords and ladies present were surprised by the relatively calm manner with which he changed the topic of conversation and how he ignored the blood that stained the floor, none of them said anything. Indeed, John Umber was the first to speak. "My lord, we know that the Freys were involved in that heinous crime at River Run. I say we position our first attack there, on the twins. Let us remove it root and stem." Ned thought about this. He knew that Yaema's cousin was Lord of the Crossing, and he was not sure whether that man had had a hand in what happened at River Run, from what he remembered of him. Cleosfrey did not seem the type, but then his father, Imin, had conspired against Lord Tywin the first time. Before Ned could respond, Lord William spoke. "I want revenge as much as the next man, but the twins has never been taken. The Green Fork splits it in two, and the two castles are heavily defended. We might be able to take it, but we would lose countless men along the way. A heavy burden, but think about the message it would send out. The Freys have been a blight on this land for so long, we must remove them. Furthermore, the only way into the Riverlands is through the passage that the twins controls. Unless we march all the way out west, or east and cross, which would leave us open to attack from the rear." Umber pointed out, "Take the King's Road, straight down from here, through the moat, and we would be there. Admittedly, we would make a steady pathway through the neck, but with the aid of the Cranig people, we would have our rears protected, and it would give us more time to get the lay of the land," Dustin countered. There was some agreement there, and Ned thought of the word he had received, of the approaching Arryn host, some 30,000 strong marching into the Riverlands. Riding straight past the twins would make sense. For convenience, they had some 25,000 men prepared for the call, but taking the twins itself might set the tone for the rest of the campaign. He did not want to march all the way around the twins and risk being hit from behind. He knew Cleo's, he knew the man, and he knew the boy. He thought he might be able to play on that. He looked at Ashara, their eyes conveying their thoughts. After a moment, he looked back at the gathered lords and said, "We shall ride for the twins." Umber and his supporters cheered, but Ned raised a hand and they fell silent. "We shall not attack them immediately. We shall see what they have to say first. Should they prove resistant to common sense, then we shall destroy them." Umber nodded, and Dustin seemed satisfied. Bolton spoke, then his voice soft. "What then? Once we have ascertained what happens to the Freys, where do we go from there?" Ned considered the query. Arryn was marching his sizable army into the Riverlands from the east. Yambi would be coming from the west, who knew what Baratheon would do. He considered it and then said, "We shall make for Fair Market and set up ourselves there. Fair Market would provide a good base next to the rivers and toward the towns and inns needed for resupply." Bolton nodded, and there was a murmur of approval throughout the hall. Ned decided he wanted to spend the rest of his time with his wife and not with the lords and ladies who had come. "Now, if there is nothing else, you are all dismissed." The lords and ladies got up and bowed before they filed out. Eventually, it was just him, Ashara, Benjen, and Lyanna left within the great hall. Lyanna came to stand at the foot of the throne and spoke. "Who are you marrying me off to?" Ned raised an eyebrow, and his sister huffed. "Come on, Ned. I'm not an idiot. I know that you will need an alliance for this war to go in your favor, and I am the best bargaining tool you have. So, who are you marrying me off to?" Ned hesitated. He had not thought about that. Yet. He admitted, before everything he had had, some half-baked notions. But now he was not sure. He did not know what to say, and was glad when Ashara said, "As of right now, we are still considering options. Sir Willis Tidrail, Prince Quentin Martell, and Edmure Tully are all options." Lyanna nodded and said, "Very well. Please just make sure to tell me what they are like before you agree to anything." Ned could promise his sister that much, so he said, "Of course." Lyanna smiled, curtsied, and then grabbed Benjen by the hand and led him out of the hall. Ned sighed. Ashara took his hand and kissed it. "Everything's going to be fine, my love." Ned looked at her and said, "When I am with you, it is. He wondered briefly if he should bring her with him on campaign, then scratched that idea despite longing to. Marriage was something that felt good. He loved Angiad, she loved him. They complemented one another very well. She was smart and slightly reserved, but with a playful side that very few got to see. He considered himself very lucky to be the one who got to see that side of his wife. She was good with managing the books and some of the more tedious aspects that came with being a lady of a great house. That she got on famously well with Mother also helped. The two most important women in his life getting on well was something that Jaime had always hoped would happen, and that it was a truth was always going to be a good thing for him. Jaime had helped him handle his grief as well. When word had come of Father's murder, he had been a mess. He had wanted to do so many things that he had felt overwhelmed. As the new Lord of the Rock and Warden of the West, he had had to remain impassive when the news had been given to him, though he had wanted to slump down and scream. He had cried into Dany's chest later, and she had held him and stroked his hair. She had provided him with the strength he needed to be there for Mother, and Cersei and Tyrion. He had done all he could to be there for his family, and Dany had been there for him. He loved her with everything he had, and he was confident that she loved him as well. That was why when the Raven had come from King's Landing carrying strict instructions from the king, Jaime had hesitated. He knew war was necessary. The rebels could not be allowed to continue on their dangerous path. The man who had murdered Father had been executed, but Jaime had a feeling that those who were really responsible for his murder were the ones now rebelling, and Jaime wanted to handle them. But at the same time, he was nervous about leaving. He had seen how war had affected Ned, how Duskendale had kept his foster brother up screaming for days and months afterwards. He was scared that that would happen to him. Yet he had summoned the banners, and the war was happening. Jaime took a breath, blinked, and then looked at his wife and Mother. Both of them were looking at him expectantly. I do not think it would be right for Dany to come with me on campaign. After all, war is no place for a lady. You are a Lannister by marriage and a Targaryen by birth. You would make a very valuable hostage should anyone dare that way. He knew that some would also mutter at his wife's presence there, simply because she was a Targaryen. His wife, however, did not seem convinced. I know that is a risk, Yakme, but I am, as you say, a Targaryen by birth. The fighting that you propose will take place in the Riverlands. The Riverlords have traditionally been staunch supporters of my family. Any lords who are wavering could well be convinced to side with us, should I be present. Jaime knew his wife was correct. There were reports streaming in of lords remaining firmly rooted within their castles and not moving for either Hoster Tully or Hendry Bracken. Perhaps his wife's presence could break that deadlock. But at the same time, there was another concern, and having you within our army would also put our soldiers at extra risk. Do you think they will be able to fight just as freely knowing that their lady is within their ranks? Soldiers will have to be assigned to guard you. That will take men away from the field. Men who would otherwise be guarding baggage trains and food supplies. I would only need 2 or 3 guards at most. No more. I would not need the number. I know you are thinking about Dany, replied. Jaxie turned to his mother. Lady Joanna's face was expressionless. For a time he had worried that Father's death had made Mother fully give in to her grief. But he had come to learn that this was how Mother was normally. This was her political face. Surely you do not agree with this, Mother. Surely you can see why Dany needs to stay here. She is Lady of the Rock. She should be in the Rock, not off gallivanting around the countryside. I would not be gallivanting around the countryside, his wife protested vehemently. I would be with you, my husband. I would be where I need to be. And what would happen to the Rock? Who would manage it? Who would look over its accounts and its stores? Who would ensure that the servants are paid on time? Jaime demanded. He knew it was a weak excuse when Mother was still with them, but he had to make it anyway. It was at this juncture that Mother decided to speak. I am still here, Jaime. I might not be as young as I once was, but I was Lady of the Rock for 20 years. I know how to manage the accounts and the household, and to ensure the servants are all paid. I know what needs to be done. I think Dany as your wife should accompany you on campaign. She will be good for you, and you will need her more than you think, after the fighting and during it. Jaime looked at his mother, wanting to demand why she would say that. He did not want to give into his desire for his wife to be with him at all times. He knew that could be dangerous not only for him, but for her. Instead, he asked his mother, "You would be comfortable doing all of that?" Mother smiled at him. "I have done it before, and I would not have difficulty doing it again." Mother looked at Dany, then said, Besides, I think Dany would prefer being with you than here, when Cersei would be doing what Cersei does, wouldn't you, sweetling? His wife blushed slightly, but said all the same. Yes. Jaxay threw up his hands. Fine, you can come to the front, but please don't get in the way. He was rewarded with a kiss to the cheek that made him smile. Then he remembered the other thing that Mother had said, and he asked, "What has Cersei been doing?" His sister seemed to vary in mood. Sometimes she was very pleasant and easy to talk to. Other times she was moody and not willing to do anything but sleep and read. Jaxay wondered why she was like this, and neither Mother or Dainty had provided him with an answer. "She continues to read the book of poetry that Bravosi traitor gave her," Mother said. James stared at his mother for a long moment. "You mean that book of love poems? Why is she reading that?" She called it a lot of nonsense when he gave it to her. He remembered that because he'd had to chastise her about not insulting their guest, she'd merely laughed at him and fluttered her eyelashes at the man. "Yes, well, it seems she has taken a liking to it and has begun reading it quite a lot, and quite loudly as well," Mother replied, sharing a sympathetic look with Dany. Jaime saw the look and asked, "And I take it this has started becoming a regular occurrence whenever you are with her?" "Yes, though I do not think she means it maliciously. I think she is merely sad. After all, you and I are married, Lord Yade and Lady Ashara are married. The two people she best are married, and she is not," Dane said defensively. Yaxley's eyes widened. "You think she wants to be married?" He could not imagine that. Every boy who had tried to court Cersei recently had left with their hearts in tatters and their pride wounded beyond repair. "I think that your sister is merely going through another stage in the journey of becoming a woman," Mother said simply. Jaime stared at his mother, comprehension slowly coming to him. He shuddered slightly and said, "I see." There was a brief, awkward pause, and then he asked, "Do you think I should start looking for someone for her to marry, then? As you are about to enter a war, that would be beneficial to the cause." "Yes," Mother replied. "I have already shortlisted several candidates for consideration." Mother pulled out a piece of paper which had several names on it, all of them written neatly. She handed him the piece of paper, and he read through it. When he was done, he asked, "How old is Edmure Tully?" 3 and 10 name days old. He would have been a good match had the Riverlands not been tearing itself apart. My personal preference is for either Willis Tyrell or for Horace Redwine or for Randall Tarley. Quentin Martell might be heir to Dorne, but Dorne has never gotten involved in any such conflicts, and I do not think that Dorne Martell is like to change that. With the war, marrying Cersei to one of your bannermen does not make sense, Mother said simply. Jaime nodded and said, "I shall need to think on this." "Naturally," Mother replied, standing up. "Do not take too long to think over it, though." With that, she nodded and walked out of the solar, leaving Jaime alone with Dany. Jaime looked at his wife and asked, "What do you think? Who should Cersei be married to?" Though they had been close once, Jaime and his sister had drifted apart over the years. It made sense. He had not really been at home that often since he was around 8 name days old. Still, there was a part of him that missed his sister, missed the closeness they had shared. Jaime was close to Cersei and likely knew her better than anyone else did, apart from Mother. His wife took a moment to think over the query before replying, "I think that Cersei might like Willis Tyrell, or she might like Quentin Martell. I think she would want someone who listens to her and makes her feel as though she matters. The others that Mother has listed don't or won't do that as it does not fit in with their personalities." Yaxley nodded. "I suppose then that Ned and I shall be in competition for getting Willis's hand for our sisters." "You know Lord Eddard is looking to get Sarah Willis for his sister?" Dany inquired. "He mentioned it in his last letter," Yamesir replied. "I think that he might go for it simply because, from what we know of him, Sir Willis is the only one who would realistically put up with all the quirks and oddness that make up Lyanna Stark." Dany smirked slightly. Then she became more somber. "How is Lord Eddard holding up?" Yagmai sighed. Word of the Red Wedding had reached them, and when it had, they had all been horrified. Yagmai had thought only of his brother, and how this would be another thing that would keep him up at night. He hoped that Lady Ashara was doing all she could to make sure her husband was not struggling. "I think he is coping. He has not written much of how he feels about what happened. But I know he appreciates what Lady Ashara has and is doing for him. And how do you feel, my love?" Dany asked, moving closer to him, so that their shoulders were touching. He took her hand in his. "Better. I miss Father, but it no longer hurts as badly as it did before. I have you to thank for that, my love, He turned and kissed her full on the mouth. She kissed him back. When they eventually broke apart, he could feel the heat in his face. "I'm glad you're coming with me. I do not think I could manage with you." Dany kissed him again and did not reply. She did not need to. He knew how she felt. He could feel it in the way she kissed him, in the way she hugged him, and then kissed him again. Eventually, they had to separate. They got up and moved to their rooms. They made love then, and Jaime enjoyed it, not knowing when they would next get to do this so freely. When they were done, he washed and changed and made his way over to the Great Hall, where the lords of the West were gathered for the War Council. They all fell silent when he entered and took his seat on the Lion Throne. He looked at them all and then asked, "What word has there been?" Uncle Kevin spoke. Bracken forces under the command of Hendry Bracken defeated a host under the command of Tytos Blackwood at the Battle of the Sound, and they are currently laying siege to Raventry Hall. Robert Baratheon and his Stormlords managed to defeat a host under the command of Lord Catherine at Summerhall, and they also managed to secure their border with the Reach by defeating Randyll Tarly's host. Tarly is badly wounded. What of the crown? What has His Majesty, the King, done? Jaime asked. He knew the king. He knew that the man would never sit on his laurels. Our sources report that he has ordered King's Landing fortified and has also summoned the banners. They are preparing to march southwards to deal with Robert Baratheon. Uncle Kevin stated, "Who commands them?" Jaime asked. He hoped it was Owen Merryweather. That man was a fool. A fool who had to be removed for the crown to really shine through. From what our sources say, the king himself plans on leading the host to handle Baratheon, Uncle Kevin stated. Yosie's eyes widened. What of Prince Rhaegar? He commands another host marching northwards to aid the Blackwoods against the Brackens. Uncle Kevin replied, "This is Jon Arryn's hands all over it," Lord Craighole said. Jaxay looked at the man and asked, "What do you mean, my lord? When there was last a war within Westeros, it was during the Pheasant Uprising during the reign of King Aegon the Fortunate. Jon Arryn was one of the main instigators of the uprising, though the king never gained enough proof to suggest that he was. In his manner of speaking, Arryn spoke of how, if he were to ever rebel against the crown, he would do it this way. Use minor houses to cause diversions, and use his main ally to bring the king southwards, and then he would bring the might of his army into the Riverlands to sweep away any and all opposition." Lord Craighole replied, Jaime considered the information he had just been given, as well as what Lord Craighole had just said, and then said, "So, you believe then that Arryn wants the king and the Prince of Dragonstone separated from one another, and that he will try and destroy the prince's host first?" "Yes. Remove the prince. The king is left with only a sickly grandson as his main heir, thus adding strength to any who might want Robert Baratheon on the throne." Lord Craighole said. "Nowhere has the man stated that is his goal," Lord Brax countered. "Indeed, in the Raven he sent to everyone. He merely stated that the king had lost his way, and that he intended to fix that." Lord Craighole snorted. "Come now, Andros. You must know what that means. The king is not going to easily change his mind, and with Jon Arryn and Robert Baratheon having rebelled, he is never going to listen to them. The king remembers what happened to his grandsire too well for that to work. No. Jon Arryn knows that removing the Targaryens from the throne is the only reasonable thing he can do for his head to remain on his shoulders." Brax opened his mouth and then shut it abruptly, and Jaime wondered at that. He also wondered where Tytos was. He would have thought that the heir to the Brax family would have been at this meeting, and knowing him, he would have been. Jaime looked around the hall, found his uncle Gerion's eye, and slowly nodded. His uncle nodded and slipped out of the hall. Jaime brought his attention back to the matter at hand when he heard Lord Jack state, "We must defend the crown. Marching for King's Landing would make the most sense." Jaime laughed. "Come now, my lord. Surely you are not that foolish. The land is up in arms. We are fighting for the king, not trying to remove him. Unless the king invites us to the capital, we cannot go there. Even if it means the city is threatened," Jast threw back at him. "The city shall not be threatened, for we shall not let Arryn attack the crown prince." Jaime retorted, "We shall march forth from here and into the Riverlands. We shall go first to River Run to aid the Tullys, and then we shall march for Fair Market and Raventry Hall. We shall force confrontation with Arryn, and we shall destroy him. And should he not take the bait, should he remain within the Vale, or go around us?" Jast asked. "Then we shall find him, and we shall destroy him, and then we shall find Baratheon and destroy him as well." Jaime stated simply. There were murmurs of agreement there, but nobody voiced anything in opposition to his words. We shall leave on the morrow. Prepare yourselves. Drink, whore. Do what you need to do tonight. For tomorrow we march for war. There was a definitive cheer at that, and the lords filed out. Jaime spent the day and the evening poring over plans for the war, preparing for every eventuality and keeping himself updated on everything. When a messenger told him that River Run was under siege, he knew he was right to suggest what he had. Dany and he made love that night, and in the morning they rode out with 20,000 men for the Riverlands and for war. He took one last look at the rock and swore he would return.
Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.